It's Labor Day, and this is Walter Fields, executive editor of NorthstarNews.com, coming to you from our nation's capital.
And hello, everyone. I'm Robert Tarver. I'm general counsel for NorthstarNews.com.
I thought it was important today that we begin with a recognition of Labor Day. And there's probably no incident in late 20th century history that brings to focus the plight of workers than the 1968 sanitation workers strike in Memphis that compelled Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to go to that city to support those striking workers. And of course, that trip cost Dr. King his life.
That's right.
So I just want to play a little clip this morning because that strike was the sanitation workers were members of the American Federation of State and County Municipal Employees, AFSCME. And AFSCME, decades ago, after the assassination of Dr. King, produced this really compelling documentary called I Am a Man. And I know, Rob, you remember seeing the photos of these black men in the streets of Memphis with the I Am a Man
Absolutely.
placards in front of them. That became a very um, important symbol of the plight for dignity. So we're going to play a couple of minutes of this, and then we'll return.
That he was not going to recognize the existence of public unions.
When a public official orders a group of men to get back to work and then we'll talk, and treats them as though they are not men, that's a racist point of view. And no matter how you dress it up in terms of whether or not a union can organize, it's still racism. For at the heart of racism is the idea that a man is not a man.
We thought we had reached an understanding during a meeting of the Public Works Committee.
The council will meet tomorrow.
Committee Chairman Fred Davis gave us a promise
That the council recognize the union and that there'll be some form of dues checkoff for the union.
We were told to meet with the council. When we got there, one of the most crude charades in the many years I've represented working people took place.
When they told me there'd be an honest council meeting today, and you and I would have a chance to talk to this council, I regret I believed them. They lied to me and they lied to you.
What's striking about that video are a couple of things. These were men who were doing what is considered to be the most menial work in a municipality, picking up trash, but also some of the most important work, because if you don't pick up trash, that leads to very serious public health consequences. And they were so sorely underpaid, and they were simply trying to get decent wages and health care as working men. And when you see that last portion of that clip, where you have the anger that comes out when they realize that they've been duped by the Memphis City Council, it brings to mind what we don't see much today. We don't see that confrontation with power. We don't see the passion of advocates anymore. What I think many people forget today, and what I think young people just don't understand, what seems to be a very mundane and matter of fact act of appearing before a government body and confronting them was really a death sentence back in those days.
It was a danger. And you know, the other thing, Walter, that we don't see, in addition to what you're saying, is we don't see the strong black male leadership. And when I say strong black male leadership, I'm not just talking about someone who wants to get up in front of a bike, but I'm talking about strategic leadership, people who are prepared to lead. You know, part of the problem is we've gotten to the point now where we believe that we can just step up in front of a crowd and be the leader, and it's an ego trip. But one of the highlights of the civil rights movement is that the persons who stepped up in all of these incidents, almost all of these historically significant incidents, had prepared themselves to lead over many battles and struggles, through some education and just through some hard fought battles of their own. And that's one of the things I think we're lacking now. Everyone wants to be a leader. but no one wants to do the preparation. And what we should really look at and really should celebrate is James Lawson. Reverend James Lawson was evidently prepared to move forward with this. And it was evident, even in the video that you just showed, that he was prepared to basically take on the powers that be. And those were huge powers at the time.
And you raised some really important points about preparation, right? And so, you look at a situation where, first of all, even though Dr. King sort of crystallized the moment, this moment was really grassroots driven and community driven. King came in sort of at the tail end because they wanted to raise the profile of this strike as part of, the ongoing civil rights movement. But the work had already been done in the community where they were organizing, right, and getting people prepared. And so the notion that it takes time, the notion that you have to build up some scar tissue. And when we talk about the American labor movement, you think of people like A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph took 10 years of work to organize the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. It wasn't an overnight thing. It took him a decade. And so these people understood that, number one, you have to invest the time. And even more importantly, and something that I just don't think people can understand right now, these people understood that I might not live to see the day
Yeah. Yeah.
that, King went to Memphis knowing there were death threats against him before he got to Memphis. So he went to Memphis sort of knowing that this might be it for me, that I may never return home to my family, that they're out to get me. And he still went. He still went against the advice of some of his closest aides who were so afraid that he would get killed in Memphis. But King said, I'm going because we have to show that this fight is our fight, that the fight for decent wages and health care for working class, and back then it was men, for working class men, is part of our larger civil rights and human rights struggle. And I think what you raised is a point that is so missed today, that we now live in this as my man Jeff Fox, radio personality Jeff Fox used to always like to say on the air, we live in a microwave society. Everyone wants to put it in 30 seconds and we're done. Some of this stuff you got to slow cook. You got to put in the oven and plan, and you got to be willing to take some hits. You're not going to win every battle.
Yeah.
But you have to be prepared to win the war.
And the other thing is, in order to understand the battle, look, I think one of the things that we learned very early, I can just tell you from military strategy, when I went to Marine Corps Officer School, you learn about strategy, and part of strategy is history. You can't take what happened in 1968 with the Monterey boycott without understanding the history. Those individuals who were there, some of them were the children of slaves, the grandchildren of slaves. And we have to look at the history of labor for Black people in America. We were forced labor slaves, and after slavery, for the longest period, we were in forced labor by redeemers. They convicted Black men on minor charges, and they held them in servitude. So slavery really continued much longer from the 1965 period into the early 1900s. And so for these individuals to stand up and to actually say, we're not going to take this anymore, that was huge. That was incredibly huge. And we have to really understand our history. So many people are willing to just bypass the egregious actions of white America against us because they don't really understand the history. They don't teach about redeemers. They don't teach about forced labor. They don't teach that we lived in labor camps and couldn't leave the property that we were once slaves in until the 1900s. And if you don't teach that, you leave a vacuum to be filled by those who would try to distort history. And that's one thing we should really take away from on Labor Day. We were the labor that built this America.
Well, absolutely. And that's why this morning I'm wearing my National Museum of African American History and Culture t-shirt, because the notion of
I'm ashamed to wear my Nike, but
is so important. But, there is a connection, right? So if you look at Nike as a corporation, and I'm not accusing a Nike of this, but contract labor was such a big issue for African Americans during the Black codes when their labor was literally sold out. right? To do the work of companies. And
Sold to
so when you
private corporations, private companies.
exactly. So when you start talking about who built America, how did America become this dominant world power? How did our economy grow? It grew on the backs of black labor that was never given its due wage, black
Mhm.
labor that was never given its proper health care, black labor that was also children in labor. My great grandmother died picking tobacco in North Carolina in a tobacco farm, and she had her 12-year-old granddaughter with her. That 12-year-old granddaughter was my mom.
Mm.
My mom saw her grandmother die on a tobacco field, right?
And if you
What
do,
was,
go
what
ahead.
was my great grandmother doing at her age picking tobacco? Right? To me, that's a depiction
Scar.
of what we went through.
That's a scar. And if you don't understand that, if you have no understanding of that, then you can't possibly understand the argument for reparations. And that's why everything ties in together. If you don't understand what they did to us, how we were used and abused along those lines for years and years and years, the immense benefit that they received from both slavery and post-slavery redemption, you can't understand why reparations are not just important, but they are warranted and necessary. If you don't understand those systems that I described, you can't understand how repulsive private prisons are, because that's exactly what happened from the period of 1965 to the early 1900s.
Yeah, and when you look at mass incarceration today and the privatization of prisons, it really is striking how this stuff in the 21st century still lingers. And so, if you had an economist who would do the sort of the present value calculation
Mm.
of what we lost in terms of real wage dollars from enslavement to present day, we'd be talking trillions and trillions of dollars. And when you travel across this country, I tell people, come to Washington, D.C. What was offensive, and we're going to switch gears here in a second, and I'm going to try to do this in a very slick way. What was offensive on January 6th was that you had white men in the United States Capitol talking about our house when black folks built that house.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was the labor of black people that built that beautiful United States Capitol building, that built the White House. It was a black man who laid out the plans for Washington, D.C.
Benjamin
And
Franklin.
January 6th is just another example of this alternative narrative that's been created about white supremacy, when you have people whose ancestors didn't lift a finger to build those great structures in Washington, D.C. And they have the audacity to show up and damage that building, damage the work of our people for the good of this country, and say, this is our house.
And that's
And
what's
so,
crazy, because for the most part, we were there long before those immigrants arrived on ships to Ellis Island and other places like that.
well, absolutely. And it is very offensive when you think about it, because it's sort of like, okay, like at some point, when does the truth matter? Like,
Mm-hmm.
when does the truth become important enough that it matters in this national conversation? And so much of what has happened since January 6th really speaks to how this, narrative has become embedded in our country. So let's shift gears for a moment, and I have up on the screen uh, what I consider to be um, a true representation of what President Joe Biden spoke about in Philadelphia last week, when he boldly called out MAGA Republicans as enemies of the state. These people are truly enemies of the state. And, as we were talking before we started recording, of how historically significant President Biden's speech was. We've had moments in American history where presidents have called out Germany, Nazis, for their atrocities during World War II, the Japanese for bombing Pearl Harbor. We had President George W. Bush calling out folks about the September 11th terrorist attacks. We never had a president, including Abraham Lincoln, who called out American citizens for their own terrorism.
Yeah.
You know, Abraham Lincoln never took on Jefferson Davis. He never took on the South directly and called them out as traitors. Joe Biden stood up in Philadelphia and said, "Look, y'all, let's be clear. There are people in the Republican Party who are traitors. They are enemies of the state." And I thought it was a bold move. And I want people to understand when they look at these faces, this is who Joe Biden was talking about. The
Yeah.
Lindsey Grahams, the Ted Cruzes, the Mitch McConnells, you know, the Mark, well, he's not up here, but the Mark Meadows, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, this is a collection of folks who not only encourage insurrection and treason, but they promote violence as a means to overthrow a legitimate government.
And we throw around the term enemies of the state as if that's, oh, well, enemies of the state, that's a too strong of a term. But let's really talk about enemies of the state. Since the state of the Union, the state of the United States, calls for and suggests as part of its whole construct free and fair elections, this group of individuals stands against that. That makes them anti-state and enemies of the state. To the extent that the state calls for and looks for equity in American life, in United States principles, and in the Constitution, these individuals have shown themselves not to look for equity, but to basically put Donald Trump's interests and their own interests and the interests of white supremacy above everyone else. It's not too strong to call them enemies of the state because they are attacking the very fiber of American life and the American state. And each one of those individuals has shown themselves to be that way. But, you know, it's interesting because I saw something about Ron Johnson the other day, and they broadcast and showed where he was actually recorded telling someone in a private conversation about how this, you know, clearly Donald Trump did not win the election. And I can show you how there's no question Donald Trump didn't win the election. And he went through a whole process, a reasoned process, showing this individual why Donald Trump is a liar and why these other individuals are lying. And yet, when he's going to get up in front of a microphone or in front of the other groups of people, he's going to say something completely different and completely antithetical. So not only are they enemies of the state, but they are hypocrites.
And fundamentally, they have betrayed the oath that they took to defend the Constitution. These people do not believe in constitutional law. They do not believe in law as the basis for this democracy because they disregard the Constitution when it becomes convenient to them to preserve their power. And that's why they become so dangerous because they have now really infected a large portion of the American public with the idea that you can overthrow an election if you don't like the outcome of the results. You can do whatever you need to do. You can change laws to prevent people from voting if you know that those very people were responsible for the loss of the person that you were supporting. You know, and when you look at what happened and really think of the totality of this conspiracy, it is deep. The fact that you had a sitting United States president calling a state official and saying, just find me this amount of votes, just enough votes to be declared the winner in your state. When you saw what was being done to try to prevent people from voting and continues to happen to prevent people from voting, when you see the outright lies, when they're telling lies, even though there's videotape evidence, and they're saying that, well, election workers were stealing votes. They were not counting ballots. And because of those accusations, it put the lives of these election workers at risk in Georgia. Like, these people are scoundrels. These are the people that, you know, if you read history books, hopefully within the next 40 years, they will be depicted as such, as the same way as the Watergate crew is now depicted in history books.
But let's talk for a minute about Georgia, if we can, because I think that that is going to be and go down in history as one of the most significant prosecutions of all time. And the reason is because the evidence in that case, more so than in the others, is crystal clear. Trump's own statements are very, very clear. He is looking for a specific action to be taken in order to guarantee his win. Unlike January 6th, where he says, come to Washington, it's going to be wild. There's some wiggle room in that statement, although you can put together other things. But his very statement in the January 6th matter is I think, very, very clear. And what Fani Willis has done remarkably is she has, and that's the other thing, they call her the Queen of RICO because she has worked with RICO long before this case. With some of the other cases that she was the one who worked on the Atlanta teachers case, where they used RICO to be able to convict them of scandalous activity. She is an expert in this. And that's why you're seeing all these different people come in. Because what the RICO Act requires is that you show that there was a conspiracy and agreement between these individuals to basically, there are 35 acts that are laid out in RICO. And one of them is an obstruction of justice. And that's exactly what she's pulling together. So we are really students and observers of history right now. And it's not lost on me that the primary figures who are moving these things against Donald Trump and these conspirators in America are Black women. You've got Fani Willis in Georgia. You've got Tish James in New York City. And it really is a great time for Black womanhood and for Black America to be the defenders of the Constitution and the defenders of democracy.
And that has always been the case.
Yep.
Black Americans have always been the defenders of democracy. If you go back to what Thurgood Marshall was doing, Thurgood Marshall was trying to make real everything that the Constitution spelled out, right? And so Black people have always defended democracy and democratic institutions and have challenged America to be what it claims to be. And when you look at Georgia and Fulton County, the other thing we have to, remind people, this is why your local elections matter.
Yes.
When you elect prosecutors, right, those people have significant powers. We often don't think of prosecutors in this sense. We think of prosecutors mainly criminal law, things that are going on within the jurisdiction of your county, but we don't understand the broad power that they have. And we're seeing it. This prosecutor is holding federal officials accountable for their meddling in her county. She's calling Senator Lindsey Graham. She's calling these folks, and the judges time and again have, supported her whenever she has issued these subpoenas, right? The judge is like, I don't care if you're a United States Senator. I don't care if you are governor of Georgia. Yeah, I know there's an election, so we'll let you get through the election. Oh, but you're going to appear before this grand jury. You're not getting it out of that. And that's what I find so powerful, because part of the mystique of white supremacy is the notion that the law does not apply to us, right? And so when you look through Jim Crow, when we knew the white people who were killing Black people in the South, and these white people would go into a courtroom in front of an all-white jury. And this still happened in 1990 in the case with Philip Pinnell. You go into a courtroom with an all-white jury, it's basically like, hey, I don't care what happened. I don't care about the facts. We're not going to hold this person accountable for what they've done. Now you have this sister down in Fulton County, Georgia, like, oh no, those days are over. Like, there's a new sheriff in town, and I'm bringing everybody in. Everyone's going to have to sit down. Now, you can sit in this seat and take the fifth 300 times all you want, but we're going to ask those questions. This grand jury is going to hear me ask those questions, and they're going to watch you evade this question. So when we come back with an indictment, it's like...
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just thought about something. Everyone needs to understand that you can't just take the fifth in a vacuum. There has to be a very real risk that the things that you say may result in a prosecution against you. So if somebody asks you your name, you can't just say I have Fifth Amendment privilege. You don't have a Fifth Amendment privilege yet because it doesn't expose you. But the fact that they are taking a Fifth Amendment privilege on all of those areas where they're being asked about this is the recognition that I may have done something wrong here and I have some criminal exposure. That in and of itself, people are passing that Fifth Amendment thing out. That in and of itself is huge. You didn't see Hillary Clinton taking the Fifth Amendment, you know? So the fact that he's up there and saying, nah, I can't answer this because I may go down for what I did. That's the common sense translation of what they're talking about.
So this is not the Dave Chappelle show where you can't say, I take the Fifth. I take the Fifth, right?
There are 5 amendments to the Constitution.
Right. And what is amazing about this, again, is that you have this Black woman who is holding this powerful position as the chief law enforcement officer for this county that is predominantly Black in Georgia, no less,
Yes.
with a white MAGA Republican governor. And this prosecutor has said, hey, all bets are off. Like, you people want to play this game of messing around. And look, she takes it personally because whenever this prosecutor speaks, she makes sure she says, this is my county. Right? You can do whatever you want to do in your county, but this is my county, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let you come in here and meddle with our election procedures. Man, this is such a badass move by this prosecutor that I think if you don't have a real understanding of law and our legal system, you can't appreciate what's going down in Fulton County. No. This is like, get your popcorn out. You know, you want a good reality show? They should call it like the Fani Willis Hour, and just every week show an hour of this sister at work.
Yeah, and just so everyone understands, don't expect anything to happen between now and November, because they're not going to move anything, you know, that close to election. That's not going to happen from the DOJ. That's not going to happen from Fani Willis. It's just not going to happen. I don't think anything's going to happen until 2023, but I do think there's going to be huge fireworks, at least in the first quarter of 2023. But wait a minute, can we talk about classified documents, bringing stuff home? If that's not the ratchetest stuff you've ever seen, the ratchetest, ghettoest stuff you've ever seen in your life. This is what's amazing about that whole thing. I don't know. Can I just read some of the sheer number of documents? If you don't mind, I got to read this. This is a document seized from his office. 1 document marked secret, 2 other government documents, 2 documents marked confidential, 7 documents marked top secret, 15 documents marked secret, 43 empty folders marked for classified documents, 28 empty folders marked return to staff, secretary, military aides. What the devil is going on here? The fact of the matter, you know, there's a woman, Asia Lamparello, in Hawaii. She got 90 days for taking 2 documents out. She never got a chance to put them back, left them on her bed. She had a dinner party, and she ended up with 90 days. This man has got hundreds of documents out purposely at a dinner party setting, which is Mar-a-Lago, where people just continuously go from room to room to room, and he's trying to pass it off like it's nothing. He should be, as my mother used to say, under the jail.
Look, man, his own former attorney general sold him out last week.
Didn't he?
When he said, I don't know what he was thinking. Like, those documents should have never been. And the thing that I love what Barr said those documents should never have been at a resort. He didn't call it a home. It was like at a resort. That's like taking those documents to Disney World and having them in your hotel room. Yep. And the part that I
come in. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. The part that I love about all of this, though, we know through the decades, we have always heard about raids on drug dealers. where they come in and they just toss the house. They break furniture. They don't care, right? They've got the subpoena in their hands and they going through everything. Well, they did the same thing to the 45th president. Apparently, they tossed Mar-a-Lago. They were like, look, we're going to search anything and everything. And you know that's what's really driving his anger. Like, they just came into my house.
Treated like a black man.
Exactly.
He got treated like a black man. That's his anger right there.
They treated me like an N-word, like I'm the former president. And you know these federal agents, the thing about federal agents, if you've never dealt with them before, they can be very expressionless in their work. Like when they show up, there's no smirk, there's no smile, there's no frown. It's like this look on their face like, we're here to take care of business. We ain't got time for nothing else. And it's almost like they're in their own world. They come into the house and they're in a zone. Like they're tossing your dresser. They're tossing your mattress. They're taking all the clothes out the closet. They're looking in the refrigerator. They're looking in the toilet tank. They're looking everywhere. And they have no regard for anything except what is on that subpoena that says that what they're looking for. And once they find it, they're done and they're out. But what was remarkable in this, what we discovered two things. The Justice Department had been trying their hardest not to get to this point. Right. They were trying to negotiate with Trump because they understood the gravity of conducting a raid on a former president's residence. So they made multiple attempts to try to get these documents back. When they got the first set of documents and they saw that some of them were classified documents, they were like, whoa, like, and then Trump's attorney lied when she attested that they had turned over all the documents. And so the Justice Department really exercised a lot of patience in saying, and because they understood, we have to get these documents back. Like, we don't know, there could be some serious national secrets that he has. And what's really alarming was all the folders marked classified that were empty. Like, where are the documents that were supposed to be in those folders? Yeah. And I think that's why Merrick Garland said, like, it's time to go in. If he's not going to turn them over, and look, this is nothing that is out of the ordinary. Every president that serves understands that those documents are the property of the United States government. They are not their personal property, including gifts that they receive as president of the United States. All of that stuff is turned over to the National Archives. And then a former president can negotiate with the National Archives if there are certain documents or gifts that he would like to keep personally. That is standard procedure. This is nothing exceptional that's being applied to Donald Trump. This is what every former president has done. This dude just sat in his office on the last couple of days, and he was throwing as many classified documents as possible in a box because what we also learned, he wouldn't allow any of his staff to help him pack.
Yeah.
Right? He knew what he was doing. And when you see how how these folders are marked, you can't confuse a folder and say, oh, I didn't know it was like classified or top secret, because they have that thing stamped in bold letters on these folders.
And here's what's really significant, based on what you said. No one helped him pack these things, right? So you have to ask yourself, how did they get to know exactly what he had? Because for them to be able to do that search warrant, they had to know specifically. And I was on a radio program the other day, and I was explaining when I used to run a narcotics strike force in a county, one thing I used to tell everyone is we always knew what everyone was doing all the time. And we knew that because everyone snitched on everyone else. You understand? Everyone has a chit in the game and they want to be protected. And so they rest on this information for when it's needed or when they think it might be needed or something else. You have to know that there's individuals who went to DOJ, whether they were forced or whether they did it on their own. They went to DOJ and they explained what documents were there, where those documents were, and what he was doing with those documents. And what we don't know is whether or not their imminent raid you want to call it a raid, the imminent raid of Mar-a-Lago was because they had received information that something else was prepared to be done with those documents. So the DOJ has played it close to the vest, which they normally do. They let a little bit more information out recently because of the application from Trump's attorneys for a special master. But there are a lot of things that we just don't know right now. And I have great suspicion, based upon my history, being both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, that there are individuals who have given a great deal of information. And I have great suspicion whenever you see someone drop off the radar, you can always question whether or not there's a reason for them dropping off the radar. Wow, we haven't heard from or seen Mark Meadows in a long time. And I have great suspicions that when someone drops off like that, it's for a reason. One of the things we do know is that immediately when this thing was getting served, Mark Meadows turned over all of his texts and everything else like that. That's not an accident. It's not an accident. Mark Meadows is not out there without counsel. He's not out there with an attorney. He's with an attorney. And you can bet and understand, for those of you who do not know how this works, the attorneys here are, if you're not directly in conflict and you're not the target, you are in direct contact with the Department of Justice attorneys, with the Attorney General's office. And you are negotiating and you are discussing. That's what you have to do for your client. So that's why I say I think the fireworks are really coming. It's already undeniable as to what has happened with regard to him and these documents. But to the extent that you're now going to get the fill-in, I believe, next year of individuals who are going to say, hey, yeah, he had these. Hey, he discussed this. Yeah, he was going to do this with it. Yeah, they stayed in this room. Heck, his own attorney from his B- legal team that he has there basically said, oh, no, they couldn't have been in that room. People go in and out of that room all the time. Oh, wow. Okay, so what you've done is you basically made the case that if this documents were exposed to everyone. So well, I just can't wait. I'm going to heat up my popcorn and just sit back and wait for 2023.
Well, here's where it really gets ludicrous too, because the first reaction from the Trump team was that these documents were planted. That somehow or another FBI planted these documents. You saw how quickly that disappeared as their defense, right? Once it became known what these documents were, like all of a sudden, that did not become part of their defense. Then you're right. People like Mark Meadows, off the radar, haven't heard from him, right? Then you also have people like Pat Cipollone, the former White House counsel. You heard his testimony before the January 6th committee. There is no love lost between Pat Cipollone and Donald Trump. And I just think that there is a chorus that is singing to the Department of Justice about what Donald Trump was doing with these documents, including the former Attorney General, who's in a bit of hot water himself as it was exposed that he basically cut off any charge of obstruction for Donald Trump on the Russia investigation prematurely, that he railroaded that investigation. So, when the reality hits you that you may be facing some serious federal time, and let's not forget Rudy Giuliani, who is probably like...
You haven't heard from him in a while either, have you?
You haven't heard. This is the man who was talking trash. You haven't heard from Rudy Giuliani. And as you said, that's because there are discussions going on between attorneys and the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice is basically, DOJ is basically very matter of fact. Like, look, here's the deal. You might be facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison if you don't cooperate. So we're ready to go that route, but we'll offer you a chance if you provide us some background on, they never call it snitching, some background on what transpired.
What they used to do is they used to make us what we call Queen for a Day offer. And the Queen for a Day is that you could come in and you could tell what you knew. And based upon you telling what you knew, that's when we would get a chance to really see what we could do and the value of it and everything else like that. But I will tell you,
You're showing your age because Queen for a Day, that was the worst TV show in history.
That's
I
right.
used to watch it with my mom, and these hardworking women would tell their sob stories and get a washing machine. It was sort of like, we're so sorry for what you have to go through. So
Let's
here's
just
a
give you
washing
something else
machine
to have to work.
so you can
More
do more work.
But here's the one thing. Just to leave it with this. This is why his attorneys, and retaining those attorneys is the equivalent of getting a podiatrist when you have a brain tumor. All right, because his attorneys they're not realizing that everything that he says and everything they say will also be used against him, because they're not going to be the trial attorneys. And to the extent that anything that they say is evidentiary, since it deals with the subject matter, you're entitled to ask where that information came from. And if they just made it up out of thin air, woo, they got a problem themselves. So these young ladies, who I'm sure he puts up there because they have a certain look, it certainly is not because of their trial experience. Donald Trump needs a trial lawyer right now, and he's not getting it. He's getting what he thinks are media attention lawyers and lawyers that can make him look good and can respond. But every one of those responses is going to be used against him.
And you're right. It's important to remember that just because you possess a law degree does not make you expert in all matters. And so Donald Trump has hired the equivalent of personal injury lawyers to handle these issues that refer to federal law and the Constitution. And, it is certainly the C team. It's not even the B team. It's the C team of legal counsel. He basically has attorneys who will do whatever he tells them to do because he's paying them. And there's already been so many errors that have been made, including this petition for a special master, which comes so late in the process. The idea that if you appoint this special master, it changes the course of this investigation. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, Department of Justice has gone through every one of these documents. They know what's there. So all a special master does, it creates the appearance that something is happening on behalf of Donald Trump's defense. It will change nothing in the course of this investigation.
Even if it's granted, it will change nothing.
Yes. And this is a strategic error on the part of his legal team. That petition should have been made right after this raid occurred. Like, you don't wait 2 weeks and say, "Oh, we want a special master." It's like, are you kidding me? It's one of these things that you look at and you realize that as smart as people think they are, they can be very stupid. And this was just stupidity on the part of Donald Trump, because he thought he could do what he always has done. Donald Trump has been a master at creating this sense of personal injury, that they're coming after me because I am so, working hard to represent the American people. They do not want me to be the president because they know that I am going to make America great again.
Well, let me ask you a question, though. Let me ask you a question. Is there any doubt in your mind that Donald Trump would create the climate for real violence in this country if he believed that he was in serious legal trouble?
Oh, no doubt in my mind whatsoever. And I don't think there's any doubt in the mind of the Department of Justice. I think one of the reasons why they were trying to negotiate with Donald Trump was this fear that it could spur another violent attack somewhere in this country. Maybe not in the Capitol, but could be in a state, right? But I think Merrick Garland and the attorneys there have gotten over that. I think they realize now that there's a greater risk of not investigating this president and, consequently charging him, because if we don't, what may happen next may be far worse than what we saw on January 6th. And people have to remember, we keep talking about January 6th. We got to remember that there was a plot to assassinate the governor of Michigan. Like, this was not like an isolated thing. there were things going on across the country where MAGA Republicans were willing to use violence to maintain control over state and federal government. So, no, I don't have a doubt whatsoever because I think Donald Trump is a fascist. I think Donald Trump thoroughly believes that I'll do whatever I need to do, including encourage violence to keep power in this country. And I think that we are at a breaking point in America right now. That if this man is not charged, we can basically throw away the key to having any semblance of lawful elections in the future. Because I think what the message will be to his people was that they are afraid of us, that we can intimidate our way into power. And we will be back to the point that we were during Jim Crow, where you had people like Sheriff Jim Clark and Bull Connor standing on the courthouse steps or on the registrar steps, basically beating black people who wanted to exercise their legal right to vote. So yeah, I have no doubt that he would do that. And in the weeks to come, we're going to keep exploring these issues because there's a lot to talk about. And Georgia, we're really going to pay a lot of attention to Georgia because what's going on down there, as you said, my brother, get your popcorn ready because this is a show like we haven't seen ever before. So this is Walter Fields, the executive editor of NorthstarNews.com, and I really encourage you to visit our site as we try to cover these issues in a very detailed way.
And I'm Rob Tarver, General Counsel for NorthstarNews.com. Happy Labor Day to all of you.